I'm Ted Brown, and I've been woodworking for over 40 years. I remember taking woodworking back in shop in high school. Since then, I studied both in Canada and the United States as a cabinet maker back in the 90s. So wood has been a large part of my life. I did technical things as well, but I always migrated back to wood because it was natural and something I could enjoy, and it had the creativity part of it. Tech didn't have that. This has got it in spades. So I love making guitars because it's woodworking that you end up with something you can use later on. Whereas a piece of furniture sits there, guitar, well, it makes beautiful sound for you and for your kids and for your kids' kids, and it stays around virtually forever. Well, I spent a lot of my early years running around in the forests up around North Bay, looking at trees and figuring out what they were and what they could be used for, that kind of thing. Birch trees can be used. Maple trees are beautiful in Canada, and where we are right now, I'm surrounded by a maple forest. And there's some cherries right over there about 50 feet away that I'd love to take down, but they're just on the other side of the property line. I could use those for guitar necks. I have some cherry on my property here too. So the association with wood, all the way from being in the tree form, and I did a lot of logging in my early years and cut thousands of board feet and air dried that. I made a barn for it and I air dried that wood, and it was specifically for woodworking. A cherry was one of the prized woods, maple, elm, a little bit of birch, some oak. You know, we have a plethora of beautiful woods in Canada, and you know, your palette is all there. The hardnesses are there. It's just a wonderful, wonderful material to work with. I took a leave of absence. I had to get away from my techie job, and I went over to Quebec to Sergei's shop, and I was in heaven. About 10 people making guitars. The smell of the wood, the beautiful light streaming in from the windows. It was in a forested location. So it was like Mecca. It was just woodworking all day long, guitar making, and getting right into it, you know, up over your head into it, and just loving every minute of it. And Sergei's incredible skill and presentation was second to none, and I learned a ton. And I really enjoyed it when we became friends. You can't really learn this craft entirely without some proper training, because there are so many things to learn, literally thousands of things to learn. So after having had a proper course, then I set out designing and making my own guitars, and learning and making and learning more and making and studying. And each guitar got better and better and better, and still today they get better and better. It's like a string that never ends. The knowledge doesn't stop. So you gain sensitivity. You know what to do and what not to do. You know how to pair certain woods with other woods. You can pair the wrong woods together and make something that doesn't sound good. So you learn a lot about wood, that's for sure. And now I know if somebody comes in and says they want a mid-range sound, kind of a Gibson sound. I had this just a couple years ago. A player came in and said, I want it to sound like my J25. I can make a guitar that sounds kind of that way by choosing Sitka spruce top, by choosing a mahogany back. So I get a warm sound, heavy on the mid-range, not a big boomy bottom end. But if somebody comes in and says, I want a really bright sound, well, I'll go into rosewoods and European spruces. And so there's a lot of this, I use the analogy of cooking quite often. You get all of these special ingredients, and good ingredients combined with good technique will make a wonderful guitar. When I was first building, I actually studied the Canadian group of 7 luthiers, Sergei being one of them. Larrivee was the head man of that group. And there was a guy down in Toronto named David Wren. And he looked really interesting. So I contacted him, and he kindly agreed to let me have a shop visit. So I went down and visited David Wren, and wow, what a craftsman. I thought if I could ever hold a candle to David Wren, I'd really be doing it. and he had a guitar he had just finished. It was a rosewood guitar with a Lutz top, and I hadn't even heard of Lutz wood at that time, which is a Canadian wood. And he said, "You want to try it?" And I said, "Well, actually, I don't play that well. Could you play it for me?" I didn't even want to touch it. It was so beautiful. It was about to be delivered. And there was David Wren playing this guitar that he had just finished. And the emotion that you get hearing something like that, it'll almost make you cry. It's just so beautiful. David Wren is second to none. You know, there are many top makers like Wren and Linda Manzer and Mr. Greenfield over in Montreal. Great Canadian makers. But David Wren was perhaps after Sergei, my first biggest influence. Blackwood guitars have a lot of interesting features that aren't done elsewhere, and that's one of the nice things about making custom guitars. I have here in front of me a couple of carbon rods. Okay, these are used in this situation. This is the sides of a guitar, and these are the end blocks. You can see the sides of a guitar are thin and rather supple. When you put a neck on this thing and you add strings for 200 pounds of pull, you run into this problem that eventually this neck block will tip, requiring you to take it to a luthier and have some surgery done called a neck reset. It's because the angle between the neck and the body changes over time. So what I've done is, let me just show you. Here's the neck block. That's what's in there. Okay. This is a specific, there are design features to this, but I won't go that deep. I take these rods, I drill and place them into the neck block, one on either side, and this goes to the waist of the guitar. So if I can show you, it would be like so in the guitar. Okay, so there's one going to either side to a bracket that goes here, and that stiffens up the whole structure and stops that neck block from moving. So you won't have to get a reset, and it stiffens the entire guitar, which adds to sustain, pardon me. Yeah. Other things that I put specific to Blackwoods is following along with sturdy makes better sustain, I make 5-piece necks. So they're laminated 5 pieces, so I'll have like cherry, ebony, maple in the middle for strength, ebony really for aesthetics, and more cherry. That runs all the way down the neck and up and through the headstock. So you won't be able to break a headstock off of a Blackwood guitar because of that. When you laminate things, they get much, much stronger. Every time you have a glue joint, things get stronger. Then the neck is stiffer so that when you play a chord or play any string, it sustains and it goes on and on. So that's just lovely. It adds to your sound. So we're doing mechanical things that add to the sound. Other things that are unique about Blackwood are things like how I brace every soundboard. Every soundboard gets braced in a non-traditional way that I've developed. And then I carve the braces and tap that top and carve the braces until I get a musical responsiveness from the top of the guitar. By studying other luthiers, I learned, of course, the internet, and I learned by experimentation. You hear a lot of things there. Sometimes you have to have your tall boots on when you're hearing people talk about guitars. In other words, there's a lot of sticky stuff on the ground. There's a lot of things that are said that aren't actually true, so I try them out myself. I did many development guitars, and a bunch of them went through the bandsaw, which means they were going to the trash, because I would try something out and it just wouldn't work that well. And that's part of really learning, like going to one end of the envelope and the other end to see what happens. Like there's a sweet spot in tops. For example, you put a top together and you bring it down to about 2.7 millimeters. But the reason that factory guitars aren't better than a custom guitar is a guy like me takes that 2.7 millimeter top and I do a wobble test. I go whoa, 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 whoa. If it doesn't wobble very well, I take some material off. And I get it to the point where it just wobbles right, and then I think, yes, that's far enough. You get down too far, I'll just give you a number. It's not, you can't follow a number because every piece of wood is different. But say I got it down to 2.3 and it's really wobbling, now I've blown it because it's just gonna flop. So having sensitivity for your materials and doing things like the wobble test is something I haven't got time for in the factory. Things like the wobble test, things like scalloping and hand carving my braces, and then lifting that soundboard up and tapping and listening for the musicality, listening for different nodes and different notes makes some of the biggest difference in handmade guitars. You know, quite often I get the question, why bother building handmade guitars? I can go down to the store. You can get one at Walmart for that matter. I can order one over the internet for $300. So why would I even think of spending $5,500 for a custom guitar? It's a fairly long answer, but I'm going to try and compress it for you. Everybody starts out with an economical guitar, let's say. And if people say, what should I buy first? I actually recommend a Canadian model, a Seagull guitar. That's a brand that I think is really good value for the money. And I'm just going to pick a number out of a hat. Say you buy a $1,000 Seagull. That's reasonably priced. Most people can buy that. And you're going to love that guitar. You're going to start learning on that guitar, and you might find that you get really into it, and then you get more and more friends with guitars, and you're all playing guitars, and that's great. So you've had your Seagull for 2 or 3 years, and then you notice your buddy's got a Gibson, and it sounds better. And then your other buddy's got a Martin. And then your rich buddy has a Cullings from Texas. They're really nice guitars. So that's what I call brand name guitars. And they come from factories. Smaller factories like Cullings make, in my opinion, finer guitars because they have more time to spend, taking care of all the little things. But if you buy a factory guitar, it has to go through the factory fairly quickly. So they thickness the top to 2.7 millimeters. They put the braces on to a recipe. A guy carves them. I saw a film on YouTube, a guy carving at one of the factories, and he did it in about 2 minutes. It was like the Ginsu knife going. It was just amazing how quickly and how skilled that man was in carving those braces. But he didn't have any time to tap and listen and tune the braces. So some of the guitars are going to work because it happened to be pretty close to what that guitar needed. Some aren't going to be as nice. So the net effect is the factory guitar is made to a recipe all the way through, and you get some that are great and some that are just okay, and some of them not so good. So you play your factory guitar for a while, your Martin, and it's lovely guitars. I'm not down on these people. They make really nice guitars. So you play your Martin, and there's so many beautiful ones around. And then one day, one of your buddies has a custom guitar made by a local luthier, and you stroke one chord, one strum, and you go, oh my God, I didn't know what I was missing. So what you hear from this guitar is you hear better separation, you hear a good solid bottom end, you get this crystal clean high end, and a big smile. Well, first of all, frustration, then a big smile when you realize, oh my God, it can be this much better. Why is it like that? Because the independent luthier, from the moment he started, checks everything. He picks up that sound or the soundboard, and he taps and he listens. You pick up the back pieces. You tap and you listen. Then they're thicknessed and braced and carved, all with sound in mind. Okay, so everything that is done has reason, and it's like a recipe that you maximize each thing so that the net effect is everything's been maximized all the way up your guitar, and it sounds amazing. I make about 12 guitars a year, about one a month. You don't make one at a time, you make 3 at a time. I found, I tried 4 and I started getting confused remembering what I did on which model. So 3 is perfect, so that when you put something, you glue up a part of the guitar, well, you don't want to sit there and wait for the glue to dry. So you move on to the second guitar, you do some activities there, and on to the third. And this goes all the way through and includes finishing, because with custom guitars, you're finishing as you build. About halfway through the build, you start finishing. So it's a different process. So yeah, about one a month. It takes about 120 hours, 150 hours for a guitar that's really got all the bells and whistles. So it takes time to make a good guitar. My students take 200 hours. So at Blackwood, we build a whole range of guitars. Some people like a small or parlor size guitar, all the way up to we actually have a super jumbo. And right now I have a commission for an acoustic bass, which is a very large guitar. On average, people tend to go up the middle. Like if you looked at the bulk of what people are interested in, it's what we call a grand concert size guitar. It's a mid-sized guitar, so you don't have that feeling you've got this big bulky guitar. It's big enough to give you a good punchy bottom end. This is where volume gives you more bass, quite frankly. But some people will say, oh, even that's too big. I want something more intimate. My little Blackwood guitar is a good selling guitar. It's a tiny guitar with a short scale on it, and people that are more petite, ladies and gentlemen that aren't 6 foot something tall, really appreciate that guitar. But I'll tell you one thing is the sound is very good because it's a well-made instrument. So it's not like you've got a little guitar so it's not going to sound good. People are always blown away when they come in and they haven't tried any Blackwoods. I hand them a little Blackwood to start. And they start strumming it and they get this look on their face like, wow. And I'll say, well, that's because I took the time to make a good instrument, even though it's of smaller stature. Then we make full-blown dreadnoughts. Those are the big ones, like the country and western guitars you see on TV. They push more sound. A guitar is really, as Irvin Samoji, who's a guitar god, would say, it's an air pump. So you've got the sound that comes off the face of the guitar, off the soundboard directly, and then you've got the sound that's pumped out from inside. So it's a combination of those things. So larger is better in terms of volume of sound, which ends up being volume, sound volume. So we make the full range, and really we like to fit people with the right guitar for them. And then we have a range of electronic pickups to electrify them, because most players that are playing on stage want to have an electrified guitar, or a guitar with a pickup. Blackwood guitars started out with traditional bracing. I've done a lot of experimentation because it does matter, but it sometimes doesn't matter quite as much as you would think. Radically different bracing patterns can produce sounds that are fairly similar. So over time, I've gone through and done things that are too heavily braced. A guitar that's braced too heavily on the soundboard we're talking about, on the spruce, will lack in high end, in the treble. The bass tends to get through because it's the big movement. But having proper bracing means to me having it carved to work with that guitar top. And it's so important that you carve and you tap the top, carve, tap, and listen until you get what we call a certain musicality, or responsiveness. That's what Irvin Samoji talks about over and over in his books, about the responsive guitar. Guitars only, they waste a lot of energy. About 90% of it is mechanical, and only about 10% of it comes out as sound. But we don't really need to care about that. As long as we're hearing it, great. So traditional bracing, the old Martin X bracing with 2 tone bars down below, still works great. If you look inside a Collings guitar, they're using a version of that tried and true bracing technique, and their guitars are really good. And I've done them with those, and they turn out really good. I do completely different things where I'll add in braces coming off of the bridge plate, so I get more drive, because your bridge plate really gets driven. That adds a bit of punch. It adds some problems if that part of the guitar ever has to be taken apart because you made it more complex. Okay, and I've had this discussion with many people, but I'm going to be dead anyhow. by the time there's a problem. So no, that's a terrible way of thinking it. I do put a lifetime warranty on my guitars because one of my friends said to me, do you believe in them? Yeah. And he says, well, forget this 3-year warranty stuff. Let's have lifetime. So every one of them has a lifetime warranty.
Their life or your life?
Yeah, my life, because they can't squeeze it on me later, can they? Okay, Blackwood guitars you're going to find are fairly natural looking. I'm not a fan of doodad type embellishments and a lot of mother of pearl and all this kind of thing. I think it's classy to have a nice wooden rosette. I think it's classy to have a nice wooden end graft on the bottom side of the guitar. A little bit of purfling around the outside. I like to let the wood that you've selected for the guitar speak for itself. So when I'm picking a piece of granadillo, for instance, I'm looking for sound. I'm also looking for wood figure. So it's a beautiful looking instrument. It's kind of like anything that's done really well. If it sounds good and it's clean in terms of the lines and it's attractive visually, that's all we need. We don't need doodads hanging off the guitar. Finishes on guitars are probably the most important component after your proper selection of woods and the mechanical things you do with the tuning. A finish can make or break a guitar. If you put too much finish on a guitar, it does what I call cloaking. It's like, imagine if you sprayed way too much varnish onto a guitar and you got it in 1/8 of an inch thick. How well would that vibrate? Well, the bass would still kind of work and the treble would not work. Treble is all about little vibrations, nodes, and the color you get is the beating of various sounds. So if you've got no small vibrations, you won't have any what we call color in the sound. So thin is good. Ideal would be no finish on a guitar. But as we all know, that's not going to work either because it's just going to get dirty and look horrible and the wood would wear faster. So I originally started out with nitrocellulose lacquer, blowing that on. That was the traditional type of finish for years. So it was sprayed on finish and you had to be really careful how thick you put it on. If you put it on too thick, it'll literally crack. Pardon me. If you put it on too thin when you're what we call finishing the finish, sanding and polishing it, you'll go through. So there's that balancing act. It was good for years, but now we have better techniques. Most people use a type of polyurethane, and I've tried polyurethane and catalyzed polyurethane. Beautiful shine and everything, but it's still dampening that sound a little bit. And so I've gone back to the same finish I used in cabinet making in California back in the early 90s. And I also learned it in Quebec when I was studying in school. I learned it as it's applied to guitars. It's called French polishing. French polish is basically, it's a natural product. Over in Asia, the bugs leave these secretions on a tree. People collect those branches, pull off the secretions. It goes through chemical processes to de-wax the material and to bleach it. It starts out as a dark brown, and by the time we use it, it's what we call super blonde. I equate it to, it looks like peanut brittle without the peanuts. And you take that, you mix it with shellac and dissolve it. So you've got a material that when you wipe it on the guitar, the alcohol flashes off very quickly, and then the shellac stays on the guitar. So using a technique called French polishing, we apply many, many super thin coats just until we have enough coats on the guitar to protect it. Then I let it dry for a week or more, and then we take very fine sandpaper, start with 600, then we go to 1500, 2000, and then we just, I polish it with an abrasive pad when I'm done. And what that does is it makes it super smooth at the end, and it has what I call a sheen, but not a shine. So you don't have that glossy, candied look. I think it looks really sharp, and when people pick up a Blackwood, they go, oh my God, this is smooth. It feels so good. Smooth as a baby's butt, as we say. Well, there's pluses and minuses when you talk about finish. You'll find that the factories won't use French polish because it takes me about 25 hours per guitar to apply and buff the French polish. It's also not as hard as the spray finishes. The spray finishes are essentially plastics, and they can be quite hard, and they will protect your guitar better. But what do you want? A shiny guitar that doesn't sound so good, or one that has a nice sheen, a super thin finish, and really sounds good? So I'll take the trade-off. Now, the shellac is also a bit softer. If the spray-on finish was a 10 on a hardness scale, this is just out of my hat, off the top of my head, but shellac might be a 6. So you can put your thumbnail in it and make a mark. So when I sell a guitar to somebody, I say, understand, with shellac, you will get little dents and bumps on your guitar over time. I think they're sort of like love marks and beauty wear. If you want to have it repaired, though, if you want to have it cleaned up and brought back to you know, the day it went out the door, we can do that in a matter of about a week. So it just takes a talented luthier who's good at French polishing, and that can be cleaned up and redone. Realistically, I think you'll take it and you'll just accept that. That you get a bit of wear. Like most guitar players, if you look, you'll see these wear patterns around their pick guards and so on, and they just let it go. Look at Willie Nelson's trigger. It's worn to the point where it's got holes in it, and he won't let anybody touch it because it sounds good. Okay, so trade-off is thinner finish, better sound. It'll wear a bit more. Your choice.